At 52, Evelyn Mercer had $68.17 left in her checking account. No job, overdue rent, and a credit card she was already afraid to open. Then the father she hadn't truly spoken to in 9 years died and left her the one thing she never wanted, his failing repair shop in Bellwether, Pennsylvania. The roof leaked, one hydraulic lift barely worked, property taxes were overdue, and a local property owner told her she'd be crazy not to sell before the place swallowed what little she had left. Even Daniel, her father's longtime mechanic, looked at Evelyn as if a broke 52-year-old bookkeeper had no business trying to save an old garage. Evelyn agreed. She wasn't there to save anything. She planned to inventory the equipment, accept the best offer she could get, and walk away from her father's problems for good. But while clearing out his office, Evelyn found a key hidden inside an old coffee tin. It opened the one desk drawer her father had never allowed anyone to touch. Inside was a worn leather ledger containing 12 names, 12 local families, and beside each name was what appeared to be an unpaid debt. Some entries were decades old. Some belonged to people who were already dead. One simply read, "Paid 3 of 4. Another said, "Noah when ready." And beside every unfinished entry, her father had written the same mysterious letter P. Evelyn stared at those pages, realizing the repair shop might have come with 12 obligations she couldn't possibly afford. Then the bell above the front door rang. An elderly woman stepped inside, gave Evelyn her name, and Evelyn's stomach tightened. The woman was number 1 in the ledger. Evelyn prepared herself to hear how much her father owed her. Instead, the woman looked at the open book, went completely still, and said, "Honey, your father didn't owe me money." What she told Evelyn next would change everything Evelyn believed about her father, the 12 unpaid debts, and why he had refused to sell that dying repair shop, even when he desperately needed the money. But before we go back to where it all began, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Wherever you are, whether you're starting your morning, taking a quiet afternoon break, or listening late at night, I hope the hours ahead are kind to you. And if you enjoy stories about ordinary people, forgotten family secrets, and the unexpected things we inherit from those who came before us, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Now, let's go back to the day Evelyn Mercer had just $68.17 left and learned that her father was dead. Evelyn Mercer sat behind the wheel of her 12-year-old Honda and stared at the grocery store receipt she had never received. Through the windshield, people pushed carts beneath the yellow parking lot lights, loading bread, milk, cereal, and ordinary Tuesday night dinners into their cars. Evelyn had left her own cart beside Register 6 after her debit card was declined. Twice, the cashier had lowered her voice the second time, which somehow made it worse. Evelyn opened her banking app again. $68.17. That was everything. 11 months earlier, the distribution company where she had worked as a bookkeeper had closed with less than 2 weeks' warning. At first, she had treated unemployment like a temporary accounting problem. Cut expenses, cancel subscriptions, apply everywhere. Make the numbers behave. But the numbers hadn't behaved. Her savings had disappeared between rent, credit card payments, and the expenses left from caring for her mother before she died. Now rent was overdue, and Evelyn had started measuring purchases by how many days they could postpone disaster. Her phone rang. She almost ignored the unfamiliar number. "Evelyn Mercer?" a man asked when she answered, "Yes. I'm calling regarding your father, Walter Mercer." Evelyn's hand tightened around the phone. She had not properly spoken to Walter in 9 years. There had been Christmas cards, 2 awkward voicemails, and letters she had never answered, but no real conversation. What happened? The pause told her before the words did. Walter had died 2 days earlier in Bellwether. He was 78. Evelyn listened to the details without crying. After the call ended, she remained in the dark car until the banking app dimmed in her hand. Her first clear thought embarrassed her. She couldn't afford the gasoline to drive to Bellwether. 3 days later, Evelyn sat in a small estate office there while an attorney turned over papers that contained almost nothing she had expected. Walter had left no meaningful savings, no investment account, no house waiting to rescue her. What remained of his estate was mostly equipment, tools, and a commercial property on Mercer Street. Mercer and Son Auto Repair, the attorney said. Evelyn looked up. He left me the shop, the property and business assets. Yes, she almost laughed. Of all the things Walter could have left her, he had chosen the place she had spent half her childhood resenting? Is there cash in the business? Very little. Debts? There are obligations you'll want to review. That phrase followed her all the way across town. Bellwether had changed since she had last spent any real time there, but Mercer Street seemed to have aged without changing. The repair shop still stood between a plumbing supplier and a fenced vacant lot. Its brick walls faded brown beneath a weathered sign, Mercer and Son Auto Repair. The word son had always been strange. Walter had inherited the name from his own father and never changed it, even though his only child was a daughter. Evelyn parked beside the building and stared at the sign. For a moment she was 11 again, sitting on the curb with a birthday card in her lap, while Walter finished one quick job for a stranded customer. One quick job had become 3 hours. Her mother had eventually come to get her. Evelyn pushed the memory away and entered through the side door. The smell reached her first. Oil, rubber, metal, and old coffee. A fluorescent tube flickered above 2 service bays. One hydraulic lift held an aging pickup several feet off the floor. A bucket sat beneath a brown water stain in the ceiling. You shouldn't stand there. Evelyn turned. A broad-shouldered man with gray threaded through his dark hair stepped from behind the pickup. Daniel Ruiz looked older than the mechanic she remembered, but his expression was exactly the same, quiet, watchful, difficult to read. Daniel? Evelyn? He moved the bucket away from her shoe. Roof leaks when it rains. She looked upward. Good to know. Office ceilings worse. Even better. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag. Didn't know if you'd come. Neither did I. The silence between them contained Walter's absence more clearly than condolences would have. Evelyn walked through the shop with a notebook, recording what she saw. Old tire machine, compressor, tool cabinets, 2 lifts. Though Daniel told her one was unreliable and shouldn't be used until serviced. The waiting area had 3 mismatched chairs and a coffee machine that looked older than she was. How many customers are you getting? She asked. Depends on the week. That's not a number. His mouth tightened. Your father wasn't exactly focused on numbers toward the end. Evelyn looked at him. That sounds familiar. Daniel stopped wiping his hands. Whatever reply he considered, he kept it. In Walter's office. Evelyn found the practical truth waiting in uneven stacks. Utility notices, supplier invoices, and insurance renewal, a county envelope stamped past due regarding property taxes. She sat in Walter's chair and began arranging everything by date, automatically falling into the habits of 27 years spent making other people's books understandable. Within 15 minutes, the pressure in her chest had returned. How was he keeping this place open? She called. Daniel appeared in the doorway. Barely. The taxes are overdue. I know. The roof needs work. One lift is unsafe. There are supplier bills here. I know. Evelyn dropped the papers. Did he know? Daniel's eyes hardened. He was old, Evelyn. He wasn't stupid. Before she could answer, a dark SUV pulled into the lot. A neatly dressed man stepped out and entered without knocking. Evelyn Mercer. He introduced himself as Leonard Pike of Pike Commercial Properties. He offered condolences first, then explained that he owned nearby lots and had previously discussed purchasing Walter's property. Your father wasn't interested, Leonard said, but circumstances have changed. He's been dead 3 days, Daniel said from behind her. He knows. Leonard ignored him and handed Evelyn a business card. I'm not asking you to decide today, but if you don't intend to run a repair shop, selling before you put money into this building may be the sensible option. Evelyn hated that he was saying exactly what she had already been thinking. After Leonard left, she placed his card beside the overdue tax notice. He made offers before she asked. More than one. And Dad refused every time. Evelyn glanced around the cramped office, at the peeling paint and sagging shelf. Why? Daniel looked toward the service bays. You would have had to ask Walter. By late afternoon, Evelyn had decided on the only plan that made sense. Inventory the assets, determine the liabilities, find out what the property was worth, sell if the numbers demanded it. She wasn't here to rescue Walter's business or settle old arguments with a dead man. As she gathered the papers, she noticed his desk had one lower drawer she hadn't checked. She pulled the handle. Locked. She tried again, then examined the other drawers for a key. Nothing. Daniel. He appeared at the doorway. Do you know where Dad kept the key to this? Daniel's gaze dropped to the locked drawer, and for the first time that day, his expression changed. No. You worked beside him for 27 years. Doesn't mean he told me everything. Evelyn rested her hand on the drawer. What's in it? Daniel stared at it for another moment before meeting her eyes. I don't know. Then he added quietly, Your father never let anybody open that drawer. Evelyn returned to Mercer & Son shortly after 8 the next morning with a convenience store coffee, a legal pad, and the determination to treat the repair shop as if it belonged to a stranger. Emotion had already cost her enough sleep. Numbers were safer. Numbers could be listed, checked, and eventually resolved. Daniel was beneath the aging pickup when she entered. Only his boots showed. Morning, she called. Morning. I'm doing a complete inventory today. Figured you would. His lack of enthusiasm irritated her, but Evelyn let it go. She spent the first hour recording equipment, tools, office furniture, and anything that might have resale value. She photographed serial numbers and separated Walter's paperwork into piles: taxes, utilities, suppliers, insurance. Each pile seemed to confirm the same conclusion. Keeping the shop would require money she did not have. When she returned to Walter's office, the locked lower drawer waited beneath the desk. Evelyn crouched and inspected the keyhole. You really don't know where he kept the key? She asked when Daniel passed the doorway. Already told you. Did he carry keys? Half the time. Other half. Daniel shrugged. Your father hid things in places that made sense to him. Evelyn looked around. Walter's office had barely changed in decades. Calendar, metal filing cabinet, framed photograph of an old Chevrolet, a shelf crowded with repair manuals. On the corner of the desk sat a dented red coffee tin filled with bolts, washers, and loose screws. She remembered it from childhood. Walter used to drop anything small into it rather than put it where it belonged. Evelyn pulled it closer and emptied the contents onto the desk. A small brass key landed among the washers. Daniel stopped in the doorway. Evelyn held it up. Apparently he wasn't that complicated. The key turned in the drawer. Inside were several bundles of receipts tied with rubber bands, old photographs, a thick envelope with Evelyn written across the front in Walter's uneven handwriting, and a worn brown leather ledger. Seeing her name stopped her, For a moment, the room seemed too quiet. She touched the envelope, but did not pick it up. 9 years of silence, and now Walter had left her words she could no longer answer. "You gonna open it?" Daniel asked. "Later." "Evelyn, I said later." She reached for the ledger instead. Paper was easier than apologies. Its pages smelled faintly of oil and dust. Walter's handwriting filled them in blue and black ink, names, dates, short notes, occasional numbers. Many older entries had a heavy line through them and the word "paid" beside them. Evelyn flipped toward the back. The final used pages contained 12 entries that had not been crossed out. She counted again. 12. What is this? Daniel stepped closer. Evelyn turned the book toward the light. The first unfinished entry read, "Margaret Cole." Beneath it were dates and the notation 4-3 completed. Another listed Rosa Bennett, followed by Noah when ready. There was Harper family with the single word, winter. Ellis had transmission written beside it. Caleb Monroe was followed by graduation. Jenkins included no charge until settled. Other entries were just as strange. Miller Tools, Santos 2 remaining. Some contained numbers that might have represented payments, but there were no dollar signs. Several dates went back years. One appeared to point forward rather than backward. Beside every unfinished entry, Walter had written the same capital letter P. Evelyn began copying everything onto her legal pad. "Do you recognize these names?" Daniel leaned over the desk. "Some customers, some were employees, no suppliers, not that I know of." Evelyn tapped the first entry. "Margaret Cole? Maggie? Lives outside town unless she moved. What did Dad owe her?" Daniel's expression tightened. "I didn't say he owed her. The ledger did. It doesn't say debt anywhere on that page." Evelyn flipped backward. "Near the front, in Walter's handwriting. A heading had been written across the top margin, DEBTS. She turned it toward him. "Close enough." Daniel stared at the word but said nothing. Evelyn's bookkeeping instincts took over. If Walter had kept this record separately, locked away from normal business accounts, there had to be a reason. Perhaps informal loans, unpaid labor, private arrangements, work exchanged for credit. None of it belonged in a properly maintained set of books, which meant none of it could safely be ignored. "How much are we talking about?" she asked. "I don't know. You worked here 27 years, and I fixed cars. I didn't audit Walter's desk." Evelyn scanned the entries again, trying to assign possible values. A transmission could easily run into thousands. Tools could mean hundreds or thousands. 2 remaining. What? 4? What? Graduation could mean almost anything. If these are obligations against the business, I need to know. "Then find out." She looked sharply at him. "That's your advice? You're the bookkeeper." "Former bookkeeper, still counting everything." Evelyn pushed back from the desk. "Because somebody has to. The taxes are late, the roof leaks, the insurance renewal is coming. One lift is unsafe. And now I've found 12 private debts Dad apparently didn't bother putting into his regular records." Daniel folded his arms. "You don't know they're private debts. What would you call them? I wouldn't call them anything until I knew what they were." The answer made Evelyn angrier because it was reasonable. She looked at Walter's envelope again. Her name seemed almost accusatory. "This is what he did," she said. "What? He made other people's problems his problems. Then somehow they became Mom's problems. Or mine." Daniel's jaw shifted. Walter helped people. Walter helped everybody. You say that like it's a crime. It's easy to be generous when someone else pays for it. The words hung between them. Daniel looked toward the service bays before answering. Your father isn't here to argue with you, I'm aware. Then maybe don't decide what every mark in that book means before you ask somebody who might know. Evelyn closed the ledger harder than necessary. Fine. She spent the next 2 hours searching Walter's regular files for the 12 names. The results only deepened her frustration. Some appeared on old repair invoices, others did not. Margaret Cole had brought several vehicles to the shop over the years, but Evelyn found no unpaid balance matching the ledger. Rosa Bennett's file ended more than a decade earlier. T. Ellis appeared on old work orders, yet nothing showed a debt owed by Walter. The records were inconsistent enough to be useless. Shortly before noon, Evelyn made a rough worst-case estimate based on what the notes might mean. She stopped when the number became large enough to frighten her, if even half of her assumptions were correct. Walter had left obligations that could consume whatever value remained after taxes and other bills. She looked through the office window at the faded service bays. Yesterday she had thought the building itself was the burden. Now she wondered whether the real burden was hidden in 12 lines of handwriting. Daniel came in carrying 2 invoices, parts supplier. Evelyn added them to the correct pile. Of course. He noticed her calculations. You're assigning dollar values to things you don't understand. That's how risk assessment works. No, that's how worrying works. And ignoring risk is how businesses fail. Daniel's face hardened, but before he could respond, the bell above the front entrance rang. They both looked toward the waiting area. An elderly woman stepped inside, wearing a blue cardigan and carrying a canvas grocery bag. She peered toward the service bays. Daniel, Maggie, he walked out of the office. Evelyn froze. She looked down at the open ledger. The first unfinished name stared back at her. Margaret Cole. Evelyn carried the book into the waiting area. Maggie Cole's expression softened when Daniel told her who Evelyn was. Oh, she said. Walter's girl. Evelyn disliked how quickly those 2 words made her feel 12 years old. I'm sorry about your father, Maggie said. Thank you. Maggie glanced around the shop. I heard you were here. I wasn't sure you'd keep the place open. I haven't decided. Evelyn tightened her grip on the ledger. Actually, your timing may be helpful. I found some of my father's private records. Maggie's eyes dropped to the leather cover. The warmth disappeared from her face. Where did you get that? His desk. Evelyn opened to the marked page. Your name is the first unfinished entry. Maggie stared at Walter's handwriting. I need to understand what he owed you. Evelyn continued, I can't promise payment today, but if there's documentation or an amount you believe is outstanding, I need to account for it before I make any decisions about the estate. Maggie slowly lifted her eyes. Payment, whatever arrangement you had with him? You think I came here to collect? Evelyn glanced at the grocery bag. Didn't you? Maggie touched the edge of the ledger with 2 fingers. Her eyes lingered on 4-3 completed, and something in her expression shifted from surprise to sadness. When she finally looked at Evelyn, her voice was gentle. Honey, your father didn't owe me money. Maggie Cole kept 2 fingers on the ledger as if the worn leather belonged to a memory she had not expected to see again. Evelyn waited for an explanation, but the older woman seemed more interested in Walter's handwriting than in her question. Daniel stood a few feet away, unusually still. If he didn't owe you money, Evelyn said, what does mean? She turned the book so Maggie could see the entry clearly. 4, 3 completed. Maggie gave a small, sad smile. That's Walter, all right. What is keeping count? She lowered her grocery bag onto one of the waiting room chairs. My husband, Frank, died 22 years ago. Heart attack, 53 years old. And one morning he was making coffee, and by supper I was picking out a suit to bury him in. Evelyn's impatience softened. I'm sorry. Long time ago. Maggie looked toward the service bays. Didn't feel long at the time. After Frank's death, Maggie explained, she had been working in the cafeteria at Bellwether's elementary school. The job paid enough to survive if nothing went wrong. Unfortunately, something was always going wrong with her car. Frank had handled repairs when he was alive. Without him, Maggie knew almost nothing about engines and had almost nothing saved. First winter after he died, the transmission started slipping. She said, "I brought the car here because Frank always trusted Walter." "Your father fixed it, and you couldn't pay?" Evelyn asked. "Not all at once. I told him I'd make payments." "Did you try?" Maggie's smile returned. Walter handed the first envelope back. Evelyn looked at Daniel. "He repaired a transmission for free." "Not exactly," Maggie said. "I paid for the parts. Walter wouldn't charge the labor." "Why, I asked him that too." Maggie had refused at first. She did not want charity. And Walter apparently disliked the word as much as she did. So he had proposed an arrangement. Over the coming years, if Maggie suffered 4 major breakdowns she could not reasonably afford, Walter would provide the labor. She would cover parts whenever she could. 4 repairs? Evelyn glanced at the ledger. "Why 4? Never told me." And he completed 3. Transmission was first. Water pump years later. Then a head gasket. Maggie tapped the notation. 3. So there's 1 left. That's what he believed. Evelyn stared at the entry. Yesterday, she had assigned an estimated liability to those numbers. Now the notation looked entirely different, yet not necessarily better. Free labor still had value. Parts still cost money. A promise could bankrupt a business just as effectively as a loan, if there were enough of them. "Did you ever ask for the 4th repair?" "No." "Then why is it still here?" Maggie looked almost surprised by the question. "Because Walter said it was—" Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "Of course he did. He promised 22 years ago. Walter didn't put expiration dates on promises." That sounded exactly like the father Evelyn remembered, and not in a comforting way. She looked through the front window at an old beige sedan parked near Daniel's pickup. "Is that yours?" Maggie nodded. "That's why I stopped by. There's a grinding sound when I brake. I was going to ask Daniel to listen to it." Evelyn felt the trap before anyone spoke. Maggie must have seen it on her face. "I'm not asking you to honor anything," she said quickly. "Walter's gone. Whatever he wrote in that book belonged between him and me." Daniel finally spoke. "I can check the brakes." Evelyn looked at him. "And if they need work, then we'd tell her what they need. And charge her?" Daniel's silence was answer enough. Evelyn picked up the ledger. She could sell the shop next week. She could refuse every strange commitment Walter had made. Legally, perhaps she would even be right. But Maggie had not demanded anything. That made refusing somehow harder. "Put it on the lift," Evelyn said. Daniel studied her. "You sure I'm sure you should inspect it? That's all I've said." 20 minutes later, the sedan was raised on the shop's functioning lift. Evelyn watched Daniel remove a front wheel and examine the brakes. "Pads are nearly gone," he said. "Rotors aren't great, but they can stay." Daniel named the price of the pads. Evelyn immediately calculated what remained in the shop's operating account, what supplier invoices were waiting, and how little room there was for generosity. "Labor?" she asked. Daniel looked at her. "Depends who's keeping count." Evelyn almost snapped at him, then noticed Maggie sitting alone behind the waiting room glass. Hands folded over her canvas bag. "Do it," Evelyn said. "Parts too?" "No. Dad's arrangement was labor. We don't invent a better promise because he's dead." Daniel's expression softened by a fraction. "Fair," Maggie protested when Evelyn explained. "I can pay Daniel." "Then pay for the pads and the labor." Evelyn glanced at the ledger. Apparently that account was opened 22 years before I got here. Maggie looked at her for a long moment. You sound like him when you're irritated. Please don't say that. Maggie laughed, and, despite herself, Evelyn almost did too. Daniel finished the brakes before lunch. When the sedan came down, Maggie placed cash for the parts on the counter. Evelyn wrote a receipt, then hesitated over the ledger. What did Dad normally do when one was finished? Couldn't tell you, Maggie said. I never saw that book before today. Evelyn drew a line beneath the old notation, but did not write paid. It wasn't her record to rewrite yet. Maggie watched her close the cover. Can I ask you something? Evelyn said. Why did he do this for you? I told you, Frank died. That's why you needed help. It doesn't explain why Dad decided he owed it. Maggie's expression changed. She looked past Evelyn toward the open service bay, where Daniel was putting tools away. First time he fixed my car, I asked him the same thing. Told him I couldn't understand why he was making my trouble his responsibility. What did he say Maggie picked up her bag? He said, somebody carried me when I couldn't stand. I'm just keeping the account balanced. Evelyn felt something tighten beneath her ribs. Who? He never said. You didn't ask, I did. Walter just told me some debts weren't meant to be paid back to the same person. Maggie touched Evelyn's arm gently and left. Evelyn watched the beige sedan disappear down Mercer Street, behind her. Daniel lowered the empty lift. You knew about that arrangement? She asked. No. But you're not surprised. Your father did things without explaining them. Yes. I'm familiar with that particular talent. She returned to the office and opened the ledger again. Margaret Cole no longer looked like a creditor. The realization should have relieved her. Instead, the other 11 names became more unsettling. If one entry was a promise, what were the others? She examined them one by one, searching for the pattern she had missed. Harper family, Winter T. Ellis. Transmission. Caleb Monroe, graduation. Jenkins, no charge until settled. Miller, tools. Santos 2 remaining. Then her eyes stopped on Rosa Bennett Noah, when ready. Daniel. He appeared several moments later, wiping grease from his fingers. Evelyn pointed to the name. Rosa Bennett. You said yesterday you recognized some of these people. Daniel looked at the page. I remember Rosa for years. What does Noah when ready mean? Daniel's face went still. I don't know. Who's Noah? Her son. Evelyn searched the nearby files until she found the thin Bennett folder she had examined the previous day. The final repair order was more than a decade old. There's nothing after this. There wouldn't be. Why? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Evelyn looked up. If this is another promise, I need to know whether somebody is waiting for Dad to keep it. Daniel pulled out the chair opposite Walter's desk and sat down, his eyes still on Rosa's name. Noah was a kid when I knew him, teenager, mostly. Used to come in with his mother sometimes. Where is Rosa now? Daniel looked at Evelyn, and whatever irritation had been between them disappeared. Evelyn, he said quietly, Rosa Bennett has been dead for 11 years. Evelyn stared at Daniel across Walter's desk. 11 years, Daniel nodded. Cancer. He looked back at Rosa Bennett's name in the ledger. Went fast near the end. Evelyn lowered her eyes to the words Walter had written beneath it. Noah when ready. Then why would Dad leave an unfinished entry under her name? I told you, I don't know. You knew her son. I knew of him. Where is he? Daniel hesitated. Still around Bellwether, far as I know. Evelyn closed the ledger. Then I need to talk to him. Daniel's expression made it clear he disliked the idea. About what? About whatever Dad thought he still owed Rosa. You don't even know if Noah knows anything. That's why I'm asking. And if he thinks you're coming to collect on some 20-year-old bill Evelyn stood, then I'll explain. I'm trying to understand why my dead father wrote his name in a locked ledger. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. You make everything sound simple when you say it fast. That's because standing still isn't helping. Daniel eventually gave her the name of the delivery company where Noah worked by early afternoon. Evelyn found him beside a row of white delivery vans behind a warehouse on the edge of town. Noah Bennett was younger than she expected, maybe 29, with tired eyes and a reflective work vest over a gray t-shirt. He looked suspicious the moment she introduced herself. Mercer, he repeated. Walter Mercer's daughter. Noah's face tightened. If this is about my mom's old repair bills, I don't know anything about them. Evelyn caught the defensiveness immediately. I'm not trying to collect. That's what people say before they tell you what you owe. I found your mother's name in my father's records. My mother died 11 years ago. I know. That surprised him. Evelyn took out a photograph she had made of the ledger entry rather than bringing the book itself. This is what he wrote. Noah read the words. His expression shifted from suspicion to confusion. I don't know what that means. Did my father ever promise your mother anything involving you? Not that she told me. Cars, money, school, no. He handed the photograph back. Walter fixed her car a few times. Sometimes he let her pay late. That's all I know. Evelyn studied him. Daniel said you used to come to the shop with her. Noah gave a short laugh without humor. When I was a kid, I liked cars then. What happened? Life. He glanced toward the loading dock. I have to get back. Evelyn nodded, disappointed but unwilling to push harder. If you remember anything, call me. She gave him the shop number written on the back of Leonard Pike's business card. Crossing out Leonard's name first, Noah noticed. You're selling the place? Maybe. Probably smart. The answer irritated her more than it should have. Everyone seems very confident about that. Noah shrugged. Old garages eat money. Then he walked back toward the vans. Evelyn returned to Mercer & Son with no clearer answer than she'd had that morning. Daniel was replacing a belt on a sedan in the first bay. Well, he asked. He knows nothing. Told you he might not. You also told me you didn't know what the entry meant. Still don't. Evelyn went into the office and searched Rosa Bennett's file again. This time she emptied the folder completely. Repair orders, handwritten estimates, receipts, an old registration copy. Nothing explained Noah. She checked Walter's drawer, then the filing cabinet. Near the bottom of a folder labeled Special Orders, she found a small envelope with Rosa Bennett written in faded ink. Inside was a receipt from a professional tool supplier in Pittsburgh. Evelyn unfolded it. The purchase was dated 8 years earlier, 3 years after Rosa's death. The item list included a complete mechanics starter set, sockets, ratchets, combination wrenches, torque wrench, diagnostic tools, pliers, and a rollaway chest. At the bottom, the invoice was stamped Paid in Full. The total made Evelyn inhale sharply. Daniel. He came in, wiping his hands. She held out the receipt. Did you know about this, Daniel? Read it slowly. No. Dad bought several $1,000s worth of mechanics tools 8 years ago. Under Rosa Bennett's name? Daniel frowned. Where are they? They searched the storage room behind the second bay, where old parts, tires, and boxed equipment had accumulated in dusty rows. After 20 minutes, Daniel dragged aside 2 damaged fenders and revealed a tall tool chest covered with a canvas drop cloth. A paper tag had been tied to one handle. Noah Bennett. Evelyn pulled off the cloth. The chest was nearly untouched. He bought these 8 years ago and never gave them to him. Daniel ran his thumb over the tag. Maybe Noah wasn't ready. Ready for what? Daniel looked toward the tool chest as if trying to summon an old memory. Rosa used to bring him here after school sometimes. He'd sit by the office or follow me around until Walter chased him out from under a car. He wanted to be a mechanic for a while. Noah said he liked cars as a kid. Daniel nodded slowly. More than liked them. He had a feel for engines, Walter noticed. Then why didn't Dad give him the tools? Maybe because Rosa died? That doesn't explain waiting 8 years. Daniel was quiet. Noah changed after she died. How? Stopped coming around, dropped out of the vocational program, I think, took whatever work he could get. Evelyn looked back at the receipt. So Dad spent this money and just waited. Looks that way. That isn't sensible. Maybe it wasn't supposed to be. Evelyn hated that answer because she was beginning to understand it. The phrase, when ready, suddenly seemed less like an incomplete transaction and more like an instruction. Walter had not bought Noah tools because he expected gratitude. He had bought them for a version of Noah that might someday return. Call him, Daniel said. You call him your ledger, your history. Daniel gave her a look. Your father, Evelyn called. Noah arrived after his shift, still wearing the same gray shirt and work boots. When he saw the tool chest, he stopped several feet away. What's that? Evelyn handed him the receipt. He read it twice. No, it has your name on it. I can see that. My father bought it 8 years ago. Noah shook his head. Why, that's what I'm trying to understand. Daniel stepped forward. Your mom ever talked to Walter about you becoming a mechanic? Noah's jaw tightened. She talked to everybody about it. She thought I was going to own a shop someday, Walter remembered. Daniel said. Noah turned toward the chest but did not touch it. I quit the program. We know, Evelyn said. Then he wasted his money. Maybe he didn't think so. Noah looked at her. You don't even know me, no. But apparently he thought you might want these someday. I deliver restaurant supplies. That doesn't mean you have to take them. Noah's eyes remained on the tools. I can't. Why? Because I didn't earn them. The sentence struck Evelyn. It sounded like something she might have said. Maybe earning them wasn't the point. Noah gave a bitter laugh. People don't buy somebody a tool set like this for no reason. Daniel leaned against the workbench. Walter didn't do many things for no reason. Noah finally lifted the canvas and stared at the unopened drawers. For a second, Evelyn saw something soften in his face, then close again. I haven't worked on an engine in years. Then don't take them, Evelyn said. Not yet. Noah looked at her. She pointed to Walter's note on the copied ledger page. It says when ready. I don't know what he meant, but it doesn't say today. Noah folded the receipt carefully and handed it back. Keep them here. For how long, I don't know. Evelyn almost smiled. Apparently my father was comfortable with that answer. Noah left without taking the chest. Afterward, Evelyn returned it to the storage room, but did not cover it completely. The second unfinished debt had not cost the shop anything that day. It had already been paid for years before. That bothered her in a different way. Walter had spent money he apparently couldn't spare on tools for a boy who might never use them. She returned to the ledger. One entry had been a promised repair. Another appeared to be a promise waiting for the right moment. The word DEBTS at the front of the book no longer meant what she thought it did. Daniel stood in the doorway. Maggie said Walter once told her somebody carried him when he couldn't stand. Sounds like him. Who carried him? Daniel shook his head. Don't know. Evelyn looked down at the 12 entries. There has to be a reason he kept doing this. Probably. And you really never asked? Walter wasn't much for explaining himself. No, Evelyn said quietly. He wasn't. The next morning, Evelyn drove to the bank with a folder containing the shop's tax notice, insurance renewal, utility balances, and the numbers she had compiled. Sarah Whitcomb, the branch manager, spent 20 minutes reviewing everything before removing her glasses. You need to decide quickly what you want this business to be. Meaning, you don't have months to figure it out. Taxes are already overdue. Insurance is coming due. The building needs repairs. Cash flow is weak. How long? Not long enough to ignore any of it. Evelyn left with no miracle and no comforting answer. By the time she returned, Leonard Pike had left another message offering to revise his purchase proposal if she wanted a fast closing. Evelyn deleted the voicemail, then immediately regretted it. Selling remained the most rational option she had. That afternoon, while trying to reconstruct Walter's final year from the shop's accounts, she opened an older box of bank statements to compare expenses. One year caught her attention because the balance had dropped so low that, by every calculation, Mercer & Son should have failed. She traced the months carefully. Supplier balances were climbing. Payroll had barely cleared. Then, over a 6-week period, money began appearing in the account. Small deposits at first, then more. Evelyn counted them once, then again. 23 separate deposits. None matched customer invoices. None had proper descriptions. Together, they had been enough to keep the shop alive. Evelyn stared at the dates, then called Daniel into the office. What happened that year? He looked at the statement and went quiet. Daniel, she pointed to the deposits. This shop should have gone bankrupt. Instead, 23 unexplained payments came in over 6 weeks. Daniel's eyes remained on the page. Evelyn felt the first real chill of understanding. Who was putting money into my father's account? Evelyn kept one finger on the bank statement while Daniel stood across from her in Walter's office. 23 deposits, 6 weeks, no customer references, no invoice numbers, no explanation that made sense. Who was putting money into his account? She asked again. Daniel exhaled through his nose and lowered himself into the chair opposite the desk. I don't know every name. That isn't what I asked. I know. He looked at the statement for a long moment. That was when your mother got sick. Evelyn stopped. The year suddenly rearranged itself in her memory. She had been 17. Her mother, Helen, had collapsed at home after weeks of pretending exhaustion was nothing. There had been tests, appointments, hospital rooms, and the strange smell of disinfectant that still returned to Evelyn whenever she entered a medical building. She remembered Walter driving back and forth between Bellwether and the hospital. She remembered him missing dinners, forgetting bills, sleeping in his work clothes. Mostly, she remembered being angry. Mom was in the hospital that spring, Evelyn said. Daniel nodded. For a while. What does that have to do with these deposits? Everything, probably. Evelyn looked down at the first one. $18, then $40, $75, another for $32, later $200. The amounts were too irregular to be payroll, too small to be loans from a bank. Did Dad borrow money? Not officially. From customers. Daniel rubbed a hand over his jaw. People knew things were bad. What things? Helen was sick. Walter was missing work to be with her. Bills stacked up. Shop was slow because he wasn't here enough. He tried working nights when he could. Evelyn remembered seeing the garage lights on after midnight during that year. She had assumed Walter was choosing the shop over them again. He should have closed for a while. Couldn't afford to. Apparently, he couldn't afford to stay open either. Daniel's eyes lifted to hers. That's why people helped. Evelyn's hand stilled. People, customers, neighbors, friends, folks who heard. She looked again at the 23 deposits. You're saying these were donations? Some, maybe? Maybe cash came in different ways. People would pay an old balance early. Somebody would leave money at the front counter and tell Walter not to ask questions. A supplier gave him extra time. I remember one week when the electric bill got paid, and Walter swore he hadn't paid it. Evelyn felt a knot form in her chest. And he accepted all this, not happily, but he accepted it. Eventually. She pushed back from the desk. He spent my entire childhood telling me never to owe anybody. That doesn't mean he never needed help. No, it apparently means he made a career out of keeping score afterward. Daniel's expression hardened. You still don't know that? Maggie's entry was a promise because he thought he owed something. Noah's tools were bought years in advance because he thought he owed something. Now I find out half the town was paying our bills when Mom was sick. What exactly do you think that ledger is? Daniel glanced toward the leather book. Maybe something more complicated than revenge against generosity. I didn't say revenge. You don't have to. Evelyn turned away. The office suddenly felt too small. She remembered her mother sitting at the kitchen table after coming home from the hospital, thinner than before, smiling while Walter heated soup. She remembered envelopes stacked beside the telephone. She remembered hearing her parents argue in low voices after midnight. At 17, she had understood only that money was short and Walter was never fully present. Now the numbers on the bank statement gave those memories another shape. Did Mom know people were helping? She asked. You'd have to ask someone who knew more than I did. She's dead. Daniel's expression softened, but Evelyn was already reaching for the phone. Maggie Cole answered on the fourth ring. When Evelyn asked about the year Helen became ill, there was a long silence. I wondered when you'd get there, Maggie said. Evelyn tightened her grip on the receiver. Get where? To the part Walter never liked talking about. Maggie came to the shop less than an hour later. She sat in the waiting area with the same quiet composure she had shown when Evelyn first opened the ledger. Evelyn placed photocopies of the bank statements on the counter. Daniel says people help Dad. Maggie read several entries and nodded. That looks right. You were one of them, probably. I don't remember which deposit was mine. How many people were involved? Maggie smiled faintly. More than Walter ever knew. Evelyn stared at her. Why keep it secret? Because he would have said no. So people put money in his account without telling him? Sometimes. Sometimes they found other ways. Maggie explained that word had spread through Bellwether after Helen's illness became serious. Walter had already begun missing hours at the shop. He was driving Helen to appointments, sitting with her at the hospital, then returning after dark to repair enough cars to keep the business alive. He looked terrible, Maggie said. Wouldn't admit he was scared. Wouldn't admit he was tired. Wouldn't admit anything. That sounds like him. One of the suppliers let him carry a balance. Somebody brought groceries to your house. A customer paid ahead for work he didn't need yet. Some folks gave cash. Someone covered the electric bill. Evelyn looked down at the statement. 23 deposits. Could have been 23 people. Could have been fewer. Could have been more. And nobody kept records, not that I know of. How did he repay them? Maggie's gaze moved to the ledger on Walter's desk. Maybe that's what you're looking at. Evelyn felt anger rise so fast it surprised her. So he spent 30 years trying to repay a town that helped him for 6 weeks? Magic didn't answer immediately. Maybe he spent 30 years remembering what it felt like to need somebody, while making sure his own family kept paying the price. Daniel shifted near the service bay entrance, but Evelyn ignored him. Maggie's expression remained gentle. You're allowed to be angry with your father. Good, because everybody else seems determined to make him a saint. I'm not. Maggie folded her hands. Walter could be stubborn, proud, difficult, and terrible at saying what mattered. Helping people doesn't erase that. The words landed more deeply than defense would have. Evelyn looked away. Maggie continued, But your mother was alive because people carried your family through a bad season. So was this shop. Walter never forgot it. After Maggie left, Evelyn went back through the statements alone. She traced the deposits against old expense records. The shop really had been dazed from collapse more than once. Payroll had barely cleared. Supplier balances were overdue. One utility notice carried a shut-off warning. Then a payment appeared. Then another. She pictured Walter at 40-something, exhausted, frightened, accepting help he hated needing for the first time. Evelyn could understand why Maggie's entry had been labeled as a debt. Understanding did not make her forgive him. If anything, it sharpened the old wound. Walter had apparently learned how to receive help from strangers, then spent decades turning gratitude into obligations to everyone except the daughter sitting across from him at dinner. By late afternoon, Leonard Pike's offer sat beside the ledger. The number looked cleaner than anything else in the room. Sell the property, pay what could be paid, walk away. Evelyn picked up the offer and stared at it until Daniel came in carrying a flashlight. "Need you upstairs." "There is no upstairs. Above the office." He pointed toward the ceiling. "Walter kept boxes up there." Evelyn frowned. "You said you didn't know what was in the locked drawer." "I didn't. This is different." Daniel dragged a ladder from the storage room and positioned it beneath a square ceiling panel near the back wall. Dust fell when he pushed it aside. "Why are you telling me now?" Evelyn asked. "Because you're digging through 30 years of paperwork anyway. You could have mentioned it yesterday. Yesterday you were ready to sell everything by lunch." "I'm still considering it." Daniel gave her a look. "Then consider all of it." He climbed first and handed down 2 cardboard boxes. Then a third. The tops were coated in gray dust. Evelyn carried them to Walter's desk. Inside the first were old service records. The second held faded photographs and receipts. The third contained several thin ledgers, each older than the leather book she had found. Evelyn opened one. Names filled page after page. Beside nearly every entry was a date, a short notation, and one word stamped or written across the line. Paid. She opened another, same pattern, a furnace repair for a family whose car had broken down in January, a set of tires, labor, a towing charge, tools, school transportation. Pages and pages of obligations completed and crossed off. "How many are there?" Daniel asked quietly. Evelyn counted the books, then the entries. She stopped trying after the number passed 100. "He did this for decades." Daniel said nothing. Evelyn turned another page, then another. Walter's private system had not begun with 12 debts. The 12 were simply what remained. She pulled one ledger closer and noticed a loose sheet tucked inside the cover on the back. In faded purple crayon, someone had drawn a crooked car with 3 wheels and a smiling stick figure beside it. Evelyn's breath caught. She knew that drawing. She had made it as a child at Walter's desk while waiting for him to finish work. Beneath the crayon marks, in her own childish handwriting, was the name Evie. Evelyn turned the page over. On the front was Walter's first list of names. She checked the date twice. It was from the same week her mother had nearly died. Evelyn kept the sheet with her childhood drawing beside the ledger for most of the morning. She had looked at the date so many times that the numbers no longer seemed real. The first list of names had been written the same week Helen Mercer nearly died. And suddenly the history of Walter's strange bookkeeping no longer felt accidental. Evelyn spread the older ledgers across the desk and began reading them in sequence instead of as isolated entries. Once she stopped looking for conventional accounting. A pattern emerged. Walter had not been handing out endless favors. Each entry was specific. One family received labor on a transmission. Another had winter repairs covered for a fixed period. Someone named Miller had been promised a set of tools. A note beside the Santos family read, 2 remaining. matching the kind of count Walter had kept for Maggie Cole. A different page recorded 6 months of emergency towing for a woman whose husband had been recovering from surgery. Nearly every promise had a boundary. He limited them. Evelyn said, Daniel, standing at the filing cabinet with a mug of coffee, looked over. What? The promises? He didn't just write, help this person forever. He wrote 1 repair, 2 visits, labor only, parts only, until graduation, through winter. She turned another ledger toward him. He was defining the obligation. Daniel came closer. Walter liked rules when the rules were his. Evelyn ignored that. She was thinking about Maggie. 4 major repairs, labor only, Noah's tools, purchased once and held until he was ready. The entries had seemed financially reckless because Evelyn had imagined them as open-ended promises. They weren't. They were concrete, measurable. Walter had found a way to make gratitude behave like bookkeeping. He couldn't identify everyone who helped him when Mom was sick, Evelyn said slowly. So maybe he stopped trying. Daniel leaned against the desk. Meaning if 23 deposits came from people he couldn't trace, paying 23 people back would have been impossible. She tapped the ledgers. So he created his own accounts. Not with the people who gave him money, with people who needed something later. Daniel studied her face. That sounds possible. You say that like you've never thought about it. I fixed cars with Walter. I didn't sit around analyzing why he did everything. For 27 years. For 27 years, he'd say. Don't charge labor on that one. And I'd ask if he was sure. He'd say yes. Sometimes there'd be a note, sometimes there wouldn't. You learn when a stubborn man isn't going to explain himself. Evelyn looked at the rows of names again. The thought should have made Walter seem kinder. Instead, it made him more difficult to understand. He had built an entire private system to manage obligations to strangers, yet had allowed 9 years to pass without repairing the distance between himself and his daughter. At noon, Evelyn and Daniel reviewed the 12 unfinished entries again. For the first time, they sorted them by what might actually be required rather than by estimated dollar amount. T. Ellis transmission likely meant labor or a repair. Miller tools might involve equipment already purchased, as Noah's had been. Santos 2 remaining suggested 2 specific acts. Jenkins, no charge. Until settled was less clear. Harper family winter could mean seasonal assistance. Caleb Monroe graduation sounded time-based rather than financial. Some of these might cost almost nothing. Evelyn said, some might cost plenty. Daniel replied, I know. She looked through the open doorway at the service floor. And that's the problem. That afternoon, they began dealing with 2 of the simpler entries. One required only confirming whether an old customer still needed a repair Walter had promised. Another turned out to involve a set of used tires Walter had already set aside in storage. Evelyn refused to let Daniel simply give away whatever people asked for. They checked notes, dates, and old work orders first. If Walter had written a specific promise, they followed the specific promise, nothing more, nothing less. You're really doing this, Daniel said after she finished documenting the second entry. I'm verifying obligations. That sounded exactly like a yes. Evelyn closed the folder. I am not turning this place into a charity. Nobody asked you to. My father apparently spent 30 years doing something close to it. No, he spent 30 years keeping promises. There is a financial difference, only if you can afford the promises. Daniel did not answer. Evelyn looked at the shop's current balance. The number was still thin enough to make her stomach tighten. A business could die from generosity as easily as from incompetence. She would not let sentiment erase arithmetic. The next morning proved her point. Daniel had raised a customer's sedan on the older hydraulic lift when a sharp metallic crack sounded from beneath the platform. "Back," he shouted. Evelyn stepped away as the lift shuddered. Daniel hit the control, but one side dropped several inches too quickly. He moved to stabilize a support arm and jerked his hand back with a curse. The car remained suspended, crooked, but secure enough not to fall. Daniel cradled his right hand. A shallow cut ran across his palm where metal had caught him. Evelyn grabbed the first aid kit from the office. "Sit down. It's nothing. You're bleeding on the floor." Still nothing. "Sit." He obeyed with visible annoyance. Evelyn cleaned the cut and wrapped it while he watched the damage lift. "That thing is done," he said. "Can it be repaired?" "Probably." Cost Daniel gave her an estimate. Evelyn stopped wrapping. "That much could be more." She finished the bandage in silence. One working lift was not enough if the shop was going to operate normally. Replacing or repairing the second one would take money they did not have. Evelyn went into the office and stared at the ledger, then at the bank balance, then at Leonard Pike's offer. For several minutes, the answer seemed brutally obvious. Sell the property, pay what could be paid, stop before Walter's promises became her financial collapse. Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Hands fine. The lift isn't—" "No, we can't keep spending money like Dad did." Daniel's face tightened. "You think honoring 2 small promises broke the lift? That's not what I said." "Sounds close." "I'm saying every dollar matters. I have $68 in my personal account, overdue rent back home, and a business that needs taxes, insurance, roof work, and now a hydraulic lift. I am not going to destroy myself because Walter wrote 12 names in a book." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "Then don't." Evelyn blinked. "What don't destroy yourself?" His voice was calm. "Your father made those promises, you didn't." The answer unsettled her because she had expected an argument. "You think I should walk away? I think you should decide what you can actually do." Evelyn looked down at the ledger. "That isn't how Dad did it." "You sure?" She frowned. Daniel nodded toward the older ledgers. "You're the one who just spent 2 days proving every promise had limits." Evelyn looked at the entries again. Labor only. Through winter. 2 remaining. Until graduation, Walter had not helped without boundaries. He had defined each obligation, even if he had failed to explain the larger reason. "Then that's the rule," Evelyn said. "We honor only what's actually written. No additions. No guilt. If something would put the shop under, we stop." Daniel nodded once. "That sounds like accounting." "Good. Walter would hate how much paperwork you're adding." "That makes me like it more." Daniel smiled for the first time since she arrived. It was brief, but real. Later that afternoon, Evelyn opened the ledger to the Jenkins entry. Jenkins, no charge until settled. Beneath it, in smaller handwriting, Walter had added a sentence she had overlooked because the ink had faded into the crease of the page. "Do not let them repay it." She read it twice. Like the other entries, this one seemed less like a limit and more like an instruction. "Daniel," he came into the office, flexing his bandaged hand, "know the Jenkins family some." "Which one is this?" He studied the page. "Probably Margaret Jenkins. Lives over on Cedar." "What was Dad doing for her?" "Don't know." Evelyn showed him the note. "Then I'm going to ask—" Daniel glanced at the wall clock. "Today, before I convince myself not to," Mrs. Jenkins answered the door of a small brick house late that afternoon. She was in her 70s, with silver hair pinned loosely at the back of her head. The moment Evelyn introduced herself, recognition appeared in the woman's eyes. "Walter's daughter." Evelyn nodded. "I found something in his records with your name on it. She showed her the copied entry. Mrs. Jenkins read the words, then pressed her lips together. He kept that all these years? Apparently. Evelyn hesitated. I'm trying to understand what these entries meant. He wrote that you weren't supposed to repay something? Mrs. Jenkins handed the page back. That sounds like Walter. What did he do for you? Kept my husband's truck running when we couldn't afford repairs. After he died, he did the same for me until I sold it, and wouldn't charge, not labor. Sometimes not parts either. Evelyn felt the familiar frustration rise. Why Mrs. Jenkins looked at her with unexpected surprise. You really don't know what? The woman's expression softened. Your father wasn't paying us back. Evelyn, she paused. He was paying back your mother. Evelyn stood on Mrs. Jenkins's porch with the copied ledger page in her hand. Paying back my mother? She repeated. Mrs. Jenkins nodded. Helen knew about the help people were giving your family. Walter hated accepting it. Your mother didn't, Evelyn frowned. Mom knew people were putting money into the shop, some of it. Not every dollar. Nobody knew every person involved. Mrs. Jenkins stepped aside. Come in. Evelyn followed her into a small living room filled with framed family photographs. On one shelf sat an old picture of several bellwether families gathered around folding tables in a church basement. Evelyn recognized her mother immediately. Helen was thinner than Evelyn remembered her before the illness, but she was smiling. Walter stood behind her, looking uncomfortable with the camera. When was this? Evelyn asked. Not long after Helen came home from the hospital. Mrs. Jenkins sat down. Walter wanted to make a list of everyone who had helped. Names, amounts, everything. He planned to pay each person back. That sounds like him. Helen told him he was missing the point. Evelyn sat across from her. What point? That people hadn't helped because they expected repayment. Mrs. Jenkins smiled faintly. Your mother told him if he spent the rest of his life trying to return every dollar to the exact person who gave it, he'd turn kindness into another bill. Evelyn looked again at the photograph. Then why did he make the ledger? Because Helen gave him another idea. Mrs. Jenkins explained that the first version had not been a formal book at all. Helen kept a loose sheet near Walter's desk. Whenever they saw a family in trouble, they wrote down something specific they could realistically do. A repair, a ride, a set of tires, a few weeks of labor without charge. Helen called it passing it forward. Mrs. Jenkins said, Walter hated that phrase. Evelyn almost smiled. He said it sounded too vague. Your father needed numbers, so he called them debts eventually. Evelyn thought of the first sheet upstairs, her childhood drawing on one side, Walter's first list on the other. For days, she had assumed he had created the system alone. Mom helped start it. Absolutely, Mrs. Jenkins' expression softened. She was better at understanding why it mattered. Walter was better at turning it into rules. Evelyn lowered her eyes. Her mother had died years ago after a long life that had moved far beyond that frightening spring, yet this part of her seemed newly alive. Why didn't anyone tell me? Mrs. Jenkins hesitated. Maybe they thought you knew. I didn't. Walter wasn't very good at explaining himself. Everyone keeps saying that because it was true. Evelyn stood to leave, unsettled more than comforted. At the door, Mrs. Jenkins touched her arm. Your father did love helping people, but don't confuse that with him always doing things right. Helen used to get furious with him too. Evelyn looked back. About what? About believing a good deed could excuse a bad conversation. The sentence followed Evelyn all the way back to Mercer and Son. Daniel was at the workbench, carefully sorting parts with his bandaged hand. Evelyn placed the photograph Mrs. Jenkins had loaned her on the counter. Mom started the ledger with him. Daniel glanced at the picture. I figured she had something to do with it. Evelyn turned sharply. You figured Helen was around the shop a lot before she got sick? Afterward, too, when she could be. Did everyone know except me? No. It's starting to feel like that. Daniel set down a wrench. You were a kid when it started. I wasn't a kid forever. No. His calm answer irritated her more than an argument would have. Evelyn went into the office and searched the older records again. Near the bottom of one box, she found an envelope containing correspondence from Helen. Most were mundane notes about household expenses, appointments, and repair schedules. Then she found a folded page addressed simply to Walter. The handwriting was unmistakably her mother's. Evelyn read it standing beside the desk. Helen had written that help was not something to be ashamed of. She reminded Walter that people had carried them through the worst months of their lives and that someday they would be strong enough to carry someone else. Near the end was a line that made Evelyn sit down. Please don't make Evie grow up believing needing people is the same as failing. Evelyn read it twice, then a third time. Daniel appeared in the doorway. You okay, Ann? Evelyn handed him the page. He read only enough to understand what it was, then returned it. Your mom had a way of saying things. She was trying to stop him from becoming exactly what he became. Maybe. What does that mean? It means Walter spent his life helping people and still managed to make his own daughter think he chose everyone over her. Evelyn stared at him. That's not something you get to judge. I'm not judging you. It sounds like it. Daniel's expression hardened. I worked beside your father for 27 years. I watched him screw things up with you. And I watched him regret it. Both can be true. Evelyn stood. Regret is cheap. So is anger if you never let anything challenge it. The words hit hard. You have no idea what happened between us. I know he wrote to you. Evelyn went still. Daniel immediately looked as if he wished he had kept quiet. What did you say? Nothing. You said he wrote to me. Daniel exhaled. He did. When? More than once after you stopped speaking. Evelyn's throat tightened. You saw the letters, saw him write some, saw him mail some. He never called. He did that too. 2 awkward voicemails in 9 years isn't trying. Daniel's voice remained low. Maybe not enough, but it wasn't nothing. Evelyn turned away. She remembered the envelopes. She had not forgotten them. That was the worst part. 3 letters had arrived during the first 2 years after the argument that ended their relationship. She had recognized Walter's handwriting and put each one in a kitchen drawer unopened. Months later, she had thrown them away during a move. At the time, refusing to read them had felt like control. Now, for the first time, it felt like a door she had helped keep closed. I didn't read them, she said. Daniel said nothing. Evelyn pressed her palms against the desk. He could have come to see me, yes. He could have tried harder, yes. He could have said what he needed to say, yes. Daniel's agreement hurt more than defense. Evelyn looked at Helen's letter. And I could have opened them. Daniel nodded once. No absolution, no accusation, just the fact. Rain began late that afternoon. Hard enough that water drummed against the metal roof. Within 20 minutes, the bucket near the first bay was filling faster than Daniel could empty it. Then Evelyn heard dripping from Walter's office. Water ran down the wall behind a tall metal cabinet. Great, she muttered. She and Daniel dragged the cabinet forward enough to slide a plastic sheet behind it. As they moved it, something metallic scraped against the wall. Evelyn stopped. What was that? Daniel shone a flashlight into the narrow gap. There's a box back there. Wedged between the cabinet and wall was a flat gray document case. Dusty but dry. Evelyn pulled it free. The latch was stiff. Inside were several envelopes, typed notes, and a handwritten sheet lying on top. Across the page, Walter had written in block letters, "If I don't finish." Evelyn felt Daniel move closer behind her. Beneath the heading was a numbered list. She counted once, then again. Exactly 12 names. Evelyn carried the gray document case to Walter's desk and set it beneath the lamp. Daniel stood beside her, his bandaged hand resting against the edge of the filing cabinet. The page marked "If I don't finish" lay between them. 12 names. The same 12 names from the unfinished ledger. Evelyn matched them one by one. Margaret Cole, Rosa Bennett, Harper, Ellis, Monroe, Jenkins, Miller, Santos. All of them were there, along with the remaining names Walter had left uncrossed. He knew, Evelyn said. Knew what? That he might not finish. Daniel pulled out the chair opposite her. Looks that way. Beneath the list were 12 envelopes, each labeled with a family name. Evelyn opened Margaret Cole's first. Inside was a short explanation of Walter's arrangement with Maggie, including the exact limit for major repairs. Labor only. 1 remaining. At the bottom, Walter had written, "Maggie may refuse. If she does, mark it complete." Evelyn frowned. He wasn't demanding we force help on anyone. Would have been difficult, even for Walter to do that from the grave. She ignored the joke and opened the next envelope. Rosa Bennett's contained a copy of the tool receipt and a note about Noah. Walter wrote that Rosa had once told him Noah understood engines better than most grown men, but lacked patience with himself. The tools were for Noah only if he ever wanted to work with cars again. If he never did, they were to be sold and the money returned to the shop. So when ready really meant when ready, Evelyn said. Daniel nodded. Not when Walter wanted. The third envelope clarified another promise. The fourth had specific parts listed. The fifth involved limited labor until a graduation date. Each one included context, boundaries, and instructions. Evelyn read faster, then stopped at a page where Walter had underlined one sentence twice. A promise isn't kindness if keeping it destroys the next person. She read it aloud. Daniel looked at her. There's your answer. To what? What happens if one of these costs too much? Evelyn traced the sentence with her fingertip. For days she had imagined Walter's promises as chains reaching beyond his death, pulling her toward the same financial cliff he had spent years approaching. But the notes said otherwise. He had expected limits. He had expected circumstances to change. He had even written instructions for cases where a family no longer needed what he had promised. Some obligations could be transferred into a smaller form. Some could be released. Some should simply end. He never expected me to bankrupt myself. Evelyn said. Daniel's voice was quiet. Apparently not. She looked at the stack of envelopes. I wish he'd written that on the front of the ledger. Would have saved you several days of yelling at me. You survived. Barely. Evelyn gave him a tired look, but the edge between them had softened. Over the next several days, the document case became their guide. They did not rush through the remaining promises, but they stopped treating each name like an approaching disaster. One family no longer owned the vehicle Walter had promised to maintain and declined anything in its place. Evelyn marked the obligation released and attached a dated note explaining why. Another had already moved away, but Walter's instructions made clear the promise belonged to a specific circumstance, not the family forever. That entry could also be closed. He really did think like an accountant. Evelyn said. Daniel looked up from the workbench. Don't insult the dead. I'm an accountant. Exactly.
For the first time, Evelyn laughed without feeling guilty afterward. Maggie returned twice, once with coffee and once with sandwiches, insisting neither counted against her remaining repair. Noah also came back.
At first he stood near the tool chest, as if being too interested might commit him to something. Daniel eventually handed him a ratchet and asked for help removing a stubborn bracket from an old engine block. Noah hesitated, then took it. His hands remembered more than he expected. By the end of the afternoon, grease marked his knuckles and his face looked different, less guarded, more awake. Still delivering restaurant supplies, Evelyn asked, "For now?" "Good." He looked at her. "Good." Walter wrote, "When ready." He didn't write, "Quit your job tomorrow." Noah smiled slightly. "You really are his daughter." "People keep using that against me." Noah did not take the full tool chest that day, but he accepted one small socket set after Daniel pointed out it technically belonged inside the larger kit. Evelyn documented it as a partial transfer, which made Daniel roll his eyes. The shop itself remained under pressure. The damaged hydraulic lift stayed out of service. The roof leak had been contained with temporary patching, but not repaired properly. Evelyn still watched every dollar. Yet something unexpected began happening. People came in. Some had heard Evelyn was sorting through Walter's old commitments. Others simply wanted an oil change or brake inspection. Maggie mentioned the shop to neighbors. A former customer brought his daughter's car in. Someone else called for a tune-up. None of it amounted to a miracle, but for the first time since Evelyn arrived, the appointment board had more names than empty spaces. She refused to romanticize it. Customers were not salvation. Revenue still had to exceed expenses. But the numbers looked less hopeless than they had a week earlier. Leonard Pike called again near the end of the week. "My offer remains open," he said, "but I can't hold the terms indefinitely." Evelyn sat at Walter's desk, with his letter to Helen nearby and the document case open beside it. "How long?" "A few more days. I haven't decided." "I understand. But sentiment can get expensive." Evelyn looked through the office window at Daniel and Noah leaning over an engine together. "So can bad timing." "Exactly. Which is why I'm suggesting you make the decision while you still have choices." After the call, she placed Leonard's offer face down. She still could not ignore it. Selling would erase immediate pressure. Keeping the shop meant accepting risk. The ledger did not change that. But Walter's note had changed something else. Keeping his promises did not mean copying his life. Evelyn could decide how much help the business could afford. She could set limits. She could say no. That afternoon, they completed the Ellis transmission entry according to Walter's instructions, labor discounted. A specific rebuilt part already paid for years earlier. No additional work. Mr. Ellis, now in his 60s, stood at the counter afterward with his wallet open. "At least let me cover Daniel's time." Evelyn pointed to Walter's written note. "Labor was part of the promise. Walter was stubborn, I've heard." "Then take something for the shop." Evelyn hesitated. Daniel watched her from the bay. "You can pay for the oil change you added," she said. "That wasn't part of the promise." Mr. Ellis considered this, then smiled. "Fair enough." It was the first time Evelyn understood how Walter's system could survive without becoming charity without end. Boundaries did not cheapen kindness. They made it possible to keep. 2 days later, they reached one of the most demanding unfinished promises. Walter had agreed to keep a widow's son's work truck running until the young man completed trade school. Graduation was only weeks away. The truck arrived coughing, rattling, and barely holding idle. Daniel listened to the engine and grimaced. "This one's going to take time." "Money?" Evelyn asked. "Mostly labor. Walter already had some parts tagged in storage." They worked late. Daniel guided while Evelyn handled records and parts. But when a simple bracket needed replacing, he put a wrench in her hand. "Your turn." I'm a bookkeeper. Today you're holding a wrench. That is not the same thing. Carr doesn't care. Evelyn followed his instructions. She scraped her knuckles, dropped a bolt, and tightened one fitting too hard before Daniel corrected her. By evening, the truck started cleanly. The owner stood beside it in silence, then ran one hand across the hood. Walter said he'd get me through graduation. You're not there yet. Evelyn said, almost. Then this gets you closer. The man nodded. Too emotional to answer immediately. Evelyn watched him drive away and felt something shift inside her. Walter's ledger no longer looked like evidence of financial irresponsibility. It looked like a record of specific moments when someone had been allowed to keep moving. Back in the office, Daniel pointed toward Leonard's offer. Still selling? I still haven't decided. Fair. Evelyn sat down. The 12 envelopes were now fewer. Some promises had been completed, others released, others clarified. She felt closer to the end of Walter's system, but not to the decision about the shop. Then she noticed his envelope. Evelyn. It had remained where she left it on the first day, unopened beneath a stack of papers. Daniel followed her gaze. You've read everybody else's instructions. Those were business. You keep telling yourself that. Evelyn picked up the envelope. It was heavier than she expected. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single brass key and a folded note in Walter's handwriting. She unfolded the page. There was only one sentence. When the 12 are settled, open the last page. Evelyn frowned. The last page? Daniel came closer. She grabbed the leather ledger and flipped to the back. The final visible page contained the unfinished entries she already knew. Nothing followed except what looked like 2 blank sheets stuck together near the binding. Evelyn ran her thumb along the edge. The paper resisted, then separated slightly. Her breath caught. Daniel. He leaned over her shoulder. 2 pages had been pressed together so tightly they had looked like one for years. Evelyn slid a fingernail between them and began to pull them apart. Evelyn eased the pages apart carefully, afraid the old paper would tear. The hidden sheet beneath them was not blank. At the top, in Walter's handwriting, was a name written larger than every other entry in the ledger. Evelyn Mercer. She stopped breathing for a moment. Daniel saw it too and stepped back without speaking. Beneath her name, Walter had written one sentence: "The only debt I never learned how to pay." Evelyn stared at the words until they blurred. "That doesn't make sense," she whispered. Daniel remained silent. She touched the brass key from the envelope, then turned the page. A folded letter had been fixed to the inside back cover with yellowed tape. Her name was written across it again. This time, Evelyn opened it immediately. "Evie," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then you found the book. And if you followed my instructions, you probably know more about these debts than I ever managed to explain while I was alive." Evelyn swallowed and continued. Walter wrote that repairing cars had always been easier than repairing relationships. A broken engine told you what hurt if you listened long enough. A bad bearing made noise. A leaking hose left evidence. Even an electrical problem could eventually be traced. People were harder. I knew how to help somebody who needed a transmission, Walter had written. I knew how to give Maggie 4 repairs without making her feel like I pitied her. I knew how to put tools away for Noah and wait. I never learned how to stand in front of my own daughter and say I had hurt her without trying to explain why I thought I had been right. Evelyn lowered the letter. Her hands were shaking. Daniel moved toward the doorway. "I'll give you some room." "Stay." The word came out before she decided to say it. Daniel stopped. Evelyn looked down again. Walter did not defend the missed birthday she still remembered. He mentioned it specifically. He remembered the customer whose car had stranded her outside Bellwether with 2 children. He remembered telling 11-year-old Evelyn he would be finished in 20 minutes.
He remembered looking at the clock hours later and realizing Helen had already come to get her.
I told myself the woman needed me more than you did that afternoon. Walter wrote, "What I should have understood was that children should not have to prove they need their father." Evelyn covered her mouth. For years, she had preserved that memory as evidence. Walter had not forgotten it. That somehow hurt more. The letter continued through smaller failures, canceled weekends, dinners interrupted by calls from the shop, money quietly spent helping people while Helen stretched the household budget. Walter admitted that after Helen's illness, gratitude had become something close to a duty. Every time he completed one of the promises, he felt he had balanced a tiny part of an account he could never fully settle. But he had confused being useful with being present. Your mother understood the difference. I usually understood it after I had already disappointed somebody. Evelyn's eyes filled. She wiped them impatiently and kept reading. Then Walter reached the 9 years of silence. He wrote that their final argument had frightened him because Evelyn had said something he could not dismiss, that Bellwether knew the generous version of Walter Mercer, while his daughter knew the version who was always about to come home. He had been angry because the accusation was unfair in places and painfully fair in others. He had waited for both of them to calm down. Days became weeks. Pride turned into embarrassment. Then embarrassment became fear. I wrote because writing was easier than hearing you tell me you were finished with me when you didn't answer. I decided you needed time. That was cowardice dressed up as respect. Evelyn stopped again. The unopened letters returned with unbearable clarity. 3 envelopes in Walter's handwriting lying in a kitchen drawer. She had thrown them away without reading a word. Daniel was still by the door. I could have read them, she said. Yes, he did not soften the answer. Evelyn nodded, grateful for that. Walter had failed her. She had refused some of his attempts afterward. Neither truth erased the other. She returned to the letter. Walter wrote that he had considered driving to see her many times. Each time he imagined the conversation. He waited until he could find the perfect opening. There never was one. I kept thinking there would be another Christmas, another birthday, another year when I would be braver. A mechanic should know better than most people that waiting does not repair damage. A tear landed on the page. Evelyn wiped it away quickly, afraid it would smear the ink. Near the end, Walter's handwriting became less steady. If you sell the shop, sell it. If you keep it, change it. Do not turn my promises into your punishment. The 12 belong to me. You do not owe Bellwether your life because Bellwether once helped save mine. Evelyn closed her eyes. That was the sentence she had needed since entering the building. The shop had never been intended as a command. The ledger was not an inheritance of guilt. Walter's final words were simpler. I loved you badly sometimes. Evie, I wish loving someone automatically made a person good at showing it. But you and I both know that isn't true. I am sorry for every time I made you feel second to this shop or to the people who came through its doors. You were not second. I just kept assuming I would have time to prove it later. You owe me no forgiveness. You owe this place nothing. Whatever you decide, make it because it is your decision. That is the one debt I hope dies with me. Evelyn folded the letter, but she could not put it away. She sat in Walter's chair and cried quietly, not with the clean relief she might once have imagined forgiveness would bring, but with grief complicated by recognition. She was mourning her father and also the conversation they had both postponed until only one of them could speak. Daniel waited. Eventually, Evelyn said, He knew. About what? That I thought everyone else mattered more. Daniel nodded. Yes. Why didn't he just say this? Probably the same reason you didn't open his letters. Evelyn gave him a wet, irritated look. You waited until I was crying to become wise? Seems safer. A laugh escaped her unexpectedly, broken in the middle by another sob. She wiped her face. The key. Daniel looked at the brass key beside the ledger. Safe. There's a safe, small one, behind the bottom cabinet. Walter used it for the deed and important papers. Evelyn stared at him. You knew about that? You never asked where the deed was. Together they moved the lower cabinet enough to expose a small wall safe. The brass key fit. Inside were no stacks of cash, no bonds, no hidden fortune that could rescue the shop. There was the property deed, insurance documents, tax records, and a folder containing several purchase proposals. Evelyn recognized Leonard Pike's company name immediately. Walter had received offers before. One was high enough to make her sit back. He could have sold for this. Daniel read the figure. Apparently, this would have solved half his problems. Maybe. Evelyn searched the folder for an explanation. There was none. Only rejected proposals and Walter's brief handwritten notation on the latest "not yet." The safe held something more important than money, though the deed was clear. No secret partner, no hidden condition requiring the shop to remain open. Walter had left Evelyn the property without restricting what she did with it. Even his letter told her to sell if she wanted. For the first time, the decision was truly hers. The next morning, Leonard Pike arrived shortly after 9, carrying a slim document folder. Evelyn had slept badly on the small couch in Walter's office rather than drive back to her apartment. His letter remained folded in her purse. The ledger sat closed on the desk. Leonard glanced through the service bay window, where Daniel was working and Noah was helping sort tools before his delivery shift. Looks busier, Leonard said. A little. That doesn't change the building's needs. I know. He sat opposite her. My offer expires today. I've prepared the paperwork so you don't have to keep carrying this decision. He slid the documents across the desk. Evelyn read every page. The purchase price would clear the immediate property obligations and leave her with enough money to breathe again. She could pay overdue rent, clear part of her personal debt, stop worrying about the roof, the broken lift, insurance, suppliers, and 12 names written by a dead man. Leonard placed a pen beside the contract. Your father had opportunities to sell, he said. He chose differently. That doesn't mean you have to. I know. Keeping a failing business out of loyalty is still keeping a failing business. Evelyn looked through the window at the faded Mercer & Son sign. A week earlier, she had wanted nothing more than permission to walk away. Now she had it from Walter himself. That changed the question completely. She opened the contract to the signature page. Leonard waited. Daniel did not come into the office. He did not interfere. Evelyn appreciated him for that. She picked up the pen and held it over the line. All right, she said. I've made my decision. Evelyn lowered the pen. But she did not sign the contract. I'm not selling you the shop. Leonard Pike's expression barely changed. Then I'm not sure what decision you've made. I'm keeping the building and the front portion of the property. She turned the contract around and tapped the survey attached near the back. But you want the land more than you want an old repair business. Leonard looked at the survey. I want the parcel. You own the vacant lot beside us and another property behind it? The unused rear section of this lot connects to both. He studied her more carefully now. Your father wouldn't divide the property. My father isn't negotiating with you. The words hurt, but they also felt necessary. Evelyn pulled her legal pad closer. She had been awake much of the night doing what she trusted most, calculating. The rear section doesn't contain either service bay, the office, customer parking, or our main access. I don't need it to operate. You do need it for whatever redevelopment you're planning. Leonard leaned back. And what are you proposing? She named a price. He almost smiled. That's ambitious. So was your offer for the entire property? A divided parcel is worth less to me. Then we're done. Evelyn closed his folder. Leonard did not move. 10 minutes later, they were discussing survey costs, access boundaries, closing dates, and a number lower than Evelyn had requested, but high enough to change the shop's immediate future. Nothing was signed that morning. Leonard wanted his attorney to review the division, and Evelyn wanted Sarah Whitcomb to examine the financial terms. But when he finally left, they had the outline of an agreement. Daniel entered the office only after Leonard's SUV disappeared. Well, I told him no. Daniel glanced at the unsigned contract. And I offered him the rear land. Walter always refused to split it. Walter also told me to change the shop if I kept it. Daniel considered that, then nodded. Fair enough. Evelyn looked through the window at the disabled hydraulic lift. If this closes, taxes get paid first, then insurance, then the roof, then the lift, in that order, exactly that order. You really know how to make an inheritance exciting. That's why I'm in charge of numbers and you're in charge of not getting crushed by cars. The agreement took several weeks to complete. Sarah reviewed the terms and helped Evelyn separate personal desperation from business necessity. The rear land sale did not make Evelyn wealthy. It did something better. It gave Mercer & Son enough breathing room to become a functioning business instead of a memorial held together by sentiment. The overdue property taxes were paid. Insurance remained active. The worst roof damage was repaired. The failed lift was replaced instead of patched into another temporary life. Evelyn also established a strict operating budget. Daniel complained about the new purchase approval sheet for exactly 2 days, then quietly began using it. Walter would hate this, he said while filling out a parts request. You've mentioned that, just keeping his memory alive. His memory is costing me enough without unauthorized brake rotors. The 12 promises remained separate from normal business. Evelyn created a file for each one and recorded exactly what Walter had promised, what had already been completed, and what remained. She refused to add obligations simply because someone had once known her father. When a customer suggested Walter would have thrown in extra labor for free, Evelyn smiled and charged the posted rate. Keeping his legacy, she discovered, sometimes required refusing to imitate him. Daniel seemed to understand. Their arguments became shorter and less defensive. He stopped treating her as the daughter who had abandoned the shop, and Evelyn stopped treating him as Walter's representative in every disagreement. Noah began spending several evenings a week at Mercer & Son after his delivery shifts. At first, he only helped Daniel clean tools and observe repairs. Then Daniel began giving him simple work. One evening, Noah finally rolled Walter's tool chest out of storage. I think I'm ready to take it, he said. Evelyn looked at the ledger entry. All of it? If that's still what he meant. It was always yours when you were ready. Noah ran his hand across the top drawer. I might look into finishing the vocational program. Evelyn did not tell him what Walter would have wanted. Then find out what it costs before you quit anything. Noah smiled. There's the bookkeeper. Evelyn crossed Rosa Bennett Noah when ready from the remaining list only after Noah loaded the chest into his vehicle. Other promises ended more quietly. A family released Walter from an old winter arrangement because their circumstances had changed. The Santos entries were completed with 2 specific repairs already defined in Walter's notes. The Miller tools went to the person for whom they had been set aside. Caleb Monroe reached graduation, closing an obligation Walter had tracked for years. The young man with the work truck completed trade school without needing another repair after the one Evelyn and Daniel had finished together. Maggie Cole's 4th repair remained available until Maggie returned one morning with her beige sedan and a strange smile. Car's fine, she said. Then why are you here? To close my account. Evelyn frowned. You still have one repair. I don't want it. Dad's note says you can refuse. Then I refuse. Maggie pushed the ledger gently toward Evelyn. I got 22 years of knowing that if something went wrong, I had somewhere to go. That was worth more than the repair. Evelyn looked at 4 reads completed, then wrote, "Released by Margaret Cole" beneath it, and added the date. Maggie watched her. Your father would have just written paid. My records are clearer. That they are, eventually. Every one of the 12 names had an ending completed. Transferred according to Walter's instructions. Or released by the person involved. No 13th obligation appeared. No hidden list replaced the old one. The account Walter had spent decades maintaining was finally closed. Evelyn placed the leather ledger in the safe with his letter, instead of leaving it in the locked desk drawer. Months passed. Mercer and Son did not become suddenly prosperous. Some weeks were strong, others were thin, but customers returned steadily. Daniel's schedule filled. Noah began working part-time at the shop while exploring the training he had abandoned years earlier. Evelyn handled appointments, suppliers, payroll, taxes, and the books, occasionally helping in the bays when Daniel trusted her with something difficult to damage. She rented a smaller apartment closer to Bellwether after resolving her overdue rent and began paying down her personal debt in amounts she could actually sustain. The shop became modestly profitable. That mattered to Evelyn more than any dramatic rescue could have. One evening, after Daniel and Noah had gone home, she took a new ledger from the office supply cabinet. It was plain, black, and inexpensive. On the front, she wrote one word: promises. She did not write DEBTS. Walter's old system had begun because he could not identify everyone who had saved his family. Evelyn understood now that his mistake had not been gratitude. It had been believing gratitude always needed to feel like repayment. She placed a copy of Walter's letter inside the front cover, not because she had forgiven every absence, but because she no longer needed anger to preserve what had happened. He had loved her. He had failed her. He had tried too late in some ways, and not hard enough in others. She had refused some doors he opened. None of those truths canceled the rest. The next morning, a woman came into the shop with a little girl holding her hand. Her aging car needed brakes and a wheel bearing. The woman listened to Daniel's estimate and went pale. I need the car for work, she said, but I can't do all of that today. Months earlier. Evelyn might have heard Walter's voice and offered too much. Instead, she opened the estimate. The brakes are the safety issue. We do those first. I can't afford the full amount until next payday. Evelyn checked the parts cost, labor schedule, and the shop's numbers. She found a solution that did not require Daniel to work free or the business to absorb money it could not afford. You pay for the parts today, half the labor next payday, half the payday after that. The woman stared at her. You'd do that? I can do that. Why? Evelyn glanced through the office window at the old Mercer & Son sign, still faded but freshly secured above the building Walter had left her. Because sometimes needing a little room isn't the same as failing. After the woman left, Evelyn opened the new ledger. She considered the blank page for a moment. This was not Walter's dent. It was not Helen's instruction. It was not Bellwether collecting payment for kindness given decades earlier. It was a choice Evelyn could afford to make. She wrote the woman's name, added the exact terms, and beneath them wrote one final line: Promise made within our means. Then Evelyn closed the book